All right, to kick all of this off, I wanted to first introduce you to the moderator, Tom Snyder. And Tom has a pretty impressive bio, but he is Executive Director of Riot, supporting Internet of Things and disruptive technology around industry and growth. And it says by day he runs Riot Labs at HQ Raleigh. And spare time, he co-instructs Product Innovation Lab, a Forbes award-winning multidisciplinary course in innovation and entrepreneurship at NC State. You notice how everything always comes back to NC State? And I'll go to the last, but he's passionate about creating and fostering collaboration across disciplines, markets, and cultures. And I've had the pleasure to work with him on a couple of things we were doing with NC State, and they've pulled me into the fold, so I'm very happy about that. So with that said, here's Tom.
All right, thank you. I'm going to ask the panel to come on up, as well as Derek Miner with the City of Raleigh, who's going to say a couple words. So while they're coming up, as Darnell said, I lead an organization called Riot. We work with both existing companies. We have about 77 companies now, I think, or 78, something like that, companies that are working with us collectively to grow the Internet of Things ecosystem here in the area. And then we also work with numerous startups, and I'm excited to lead a startup panel here. I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but first I want to cede the mic to Derek. Derek pulled this panel together. He works with the entrepreneurial community here in Raleigh. He's an economic developer focused on kind of growing things from Raleigh and then supporting folks that want to come from outside the area into the area to grow new companies, to create jobs. So Derek.
Thank you, Tom. You actually said everything that I was going to say. So let's, we'll go ahead and kick this off. I'm really excited about this panel. I have been working in this space for the last 8 years, almost since its organized inception, I should say. And these folks are just a great representation of the diverse array of industries that can be represented through IoT and smart cities. So let's bring back Tom. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Derek. And we're going to ask Derek to go ahead and join the panel as well if he'd like. He can join at the end there. So real quickly before we begin, I was asked to say a couple words about a guy named Larry Stefan. Many of you that are from the area may have known Larry. Larry was co-founder of Riot and the general manager of the Wireless Research Center, and the Wireless Center is happy to be a sponsor of today's organization. The Wireless Center and Riot are the same 501c3 economic development nonprofit here in the area. It was probably a few years back, I remember, maybe almost 3 years ago, some early meetings with Dennis and with others about this concept of doing the Smart City Summit. And Larry was a connector. As you just heard a moment ago from Dennis, he is a dot connector at NC State. Larry was a dot connector in the entrepreneurial community, helping bring folks together, helping to connect government and investors, helping to connect academics and entrepreneurs, helping to connect big industry and the small companies that need to partner with them. And so unfortunately we lost Larry earlier this year, but we're really proud to carry on the tradition that he set. And so I'm happy to be here today to continue that forward, and I'm sure we'll do that many years into the future. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and we'll get started by asking our panelists to each introduce themselves and the organizations they work with. Unfortunately, Scott Moody wasn't able to be here with us this evening, so Ralphie from A Christmas Story, maybe you'll get us kicked off at the far end and then we'll work our way back down.
Yeah, I stepped in for my father, Scott Moody. He's waiting for an important package from Fragile at home. So my father actually, he's the co-founder, chief member advocate, and CEO of a company called K4 Connect. Previously, he was co-founder and CEO of a company called Authentic, raised a bunch of venture capital, took the company public, and then were acquired by Apple in 2012. So actually still the only public company acquired by Apple. And if you're familiar with the Touch ID, that was started by my father and another guy who was actually generally referred to as the smart guy. So, but anyway, the K4 Connect is really a mission-centered company wholly focused on empowering and serving older adults and people living with disabilities by having developed something called Fusion OS Technologies that integrates every aspect of their lives right into a single platform, a single system, all accessible through a single application or voice technologies. Their first product is something called K4 Community, which is specifically for older adults, residents living in senior living communities. So really it's a combination of think about smart home, smart health and wellness, and bringing together all those devices and technologies, as well as smart living, so everything's accessible through your voice. So it could be setting up a reservation, know what's planned for the day, et cetera, and that all integrates to provide something we refer to as the smart community. Eventually, we actually plan on getting into the home with products called K4 Home as well.
All right, thank you, Scott. Tyler.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Tyler Collins. I'm the Vice President of Energy and Telecom at Precision Hawk. Precision Hawk is a drone company. We like to fly small airplanes and collect data for various enterprise companies. What's really interesting when looking at how do drones apply into the connected space in smart cities is when starting to look at different industries such as telecom. 5G is now one of the biggest discussion points that we're talking about, and one thing that's already been talked about in many points today. But in order to deploy 5G and deploy it effectively and make sure that it's working for all of us long term, we're looking at using drones to be able to inspect all of the little 5G receivers and transmitters on all of the light poles as we install them throughout cities. We use a lot of machine learning and a lot of automation in order to capture data from the drones and actually make sense out of that data from the drones, but really excited to be here. Thank you.
All right, Ryan?
Ryan Crodel with Valencell, and Valencell is in the wearable technology space, but we're a bit of a unique company in that space in that we make the biometric sensor technology that goes into wearable devices of all kinds. So the easy way to think about the technology is the green blinking lights on the back of a smartwatch or a fitness band or whatever it might be. That is very likely our technology. And what that methodology of shining light into the body and measuring how much of that light is reflected back based on blood flow, that methodology's been around for decades, if not longer. The innovation and really the core value proposition that Valencell brings to the wearables market is making that methodology motion tolerant, because by default as soon as you put that technology on a device that someone wears around on a daily basis, they are naturally going to be moving, and that has a tendency to throw off those sensors in a significant way and significantly impact the accuracy. So Valencell's innovated in a lot of different ways from a hardware and a software standpoint to make that technology motion tolerant and therefore enabled to be put into wearable devices. Our technology has been embedded into north of 35 different products that are on the market from companies like Samsung and Sony and LG and Bose and Suunto and a bunch of others. And then we work with a lot of small and mid-sized companies as well. And what brings us here is the majority of our products in market today are on the consumer wearable side of things, just given how that's where the wearables market grew up. But now we're starting to integrate this technology into all kinds of different devices and form factors and industries and use cases. To give you a few examples, health and medical, so things like remote patient monitoring and measuring blood pressure off of these same sensor modules we're able to do now. We're integrating this technology into industrial safety devices and enterprise wearable applications, and then also AR and VR headsets used for training applications or also in the health and medical sector to address things like pain management and overall health and wellness applications. So we'll, I'm sure, talk a little bit more about that as we go along here.
Great, thanks. Keith.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Keith Stewart, and I'm the Chief Revenue Officer with Site 1001. I joined Site 1001 a little over 2 years ago from IBM, where I formerly ran sales globally for the Internet of Things division. That's what brought me here to Raleigh, and what also kept me away from Raleigh all the time. So I was happy to be moving into a startup environment where I'm able to participate in events like this, network, meet very interesting people that I can work and share with and grow businesses like Site 1001. Site 1001 itself was spun out of about a $4 billion construction company a little over 2 years ago. Their focus is really on everything that happens with that building after the project is turned over. The expense related to operating buildings is about 4 times that of the construction costs, meaning if you spend $100 million building a building, during the lifespan from commissioning to decommissioning, you'll probably spend around $400 million. And that's in people, that's in energy, that's in asset management, that's in all of the different costs associated around running those buildings. So if you can take that information from construction and apply it to the operations, which is what Site 1001 does, you can significantly address that operating expense. And we can reduce your operating expense by real large whole number values. And we do that in a number of ways. One of those is taking all of your documentation, all of the information and data that you have about the building, digitize it, and providing it to you in a highly curated when and where you need it approach. We then plug into your control systems and visualize what you're doing in terms of energy and model the behavior of what happens in the building. Put abilities to apply that to valuation on the buildings, give you reports and insights that you can help run day-to-day operations much, much more efficiently. So we're here, we're growing within the Raleigh market, and we're very excited to be here today. Thank you.
Cool. Well, thank you all for being here. I'm really excited about this panel because we have folks that have different viewpoints of different markets. And I think one of the things one of the reasons that you bring a bunch of startups into a smart city conference or into any kind of conference that's focused around a particular vertical is that it's important to have this diversity of different opinions and things that come in from the academic community, obviously a strong representation from NC State, but also UNC and Duke and others here today, from the business community, from the government community. But the entrepreneurial community in this area is just going gangbusters. And for those that have followed the news recently on recent fundraisers and things that we'll get to in a moment, there's a lot of evidence to back that up. But as we are at a Smart Cities Conference, let's start maybe, Scott, with you. Your go-to-market has been working with retirement communities, which in a sense are small cities themselves. So how is K4 technology helping them to operate in a way that supports their citizens, if you will?
I have no idea.
All right, next.
Next.
So, everybody always talks when it's smart cities, and I was mentioning smart home and smart living and all those things. It's always about the what and the how. But look, I actually think the thing that we got right is the who and the why. So I may have a chance to talk about it later, but we are very much a mission-centered company, and that mission is to serve the underserved, both technologically and economically, right? So when you want to make a city smart, then the first thing to figure out is who you're doing it for. So I'm often in San Francisco, and there was an article a couple of years ago, and the title of it was, "Welcome to San Francisco, the premier assisted living community for millennials," right? So you're a 25-year-old, you could sit on the couch and never have to get up. Food is delivered, this is done, services are made. God forbid you have to go 2 blocks to do something and there's a scooter, there's like 8,000 scooters, or a bicycle or a Lyft ride, so God forbid you don't get any exercise, right? So, so then the question is, if I look at the population here of 5 years ago, right, older adults that lived in a number of the communities, right? Poor people that lived in a number of the communities, right? We get all excited about, look at this new building and look at this new smart technology, or look at, we have Lime and Bird, but really is that really how we define smart? It's cool, it's hip, it's like the new stuff, but what really value is it adding to the residents that live here? Right, and then how are we as a city and an entrepreneurial community responsible to them directly? So, I just use the example, no disrespect for the scooters, but, the fact of the matter is it like really smart? Like, I know it's really convenient, right? This is really smart. It takes electricity, right? Because you have to charge them up at night versus walk, right? You're now taking a scooter instead of walking, i.e. your exercise, and exercise is one of the most important things to health, and health is a significant issue in the U.S. So, you know, all of those things, I think it's really important, and that's what we've done really well. Even in a senior living community, I would say almost everybody else that ever looked at that market was looking at, like, how can I save the operator money? How can I do this for the staff, and so on and so forth. We, bar none, start with the resident, right? That's the focus of what we do, who we refer to as our member. How do we make their lives simpler, healthier, and happier, right? And if we do that, then the benefit flows to the ecosystem around them. It flows to the staff, it flows to the family and friends, and it flows to the operator as well, who we recognize needs to make an ROI to continue to foster that. So, but it always, what I do think we got right more than anything else, and like we have a bunch of patents now, and I'm really, you know, pleased with our technology, and we're mainly a bunch of engineers, but what we really got right, is, you know, who we're serving. Every single person in the company, I've never liked the term employee, we call every single person in the company an advocate, because your job, bar none, is to advocate for the end user, right? And if you do that, then the company will do well, right? And I'd be very pleased. And if I'm not, then you ought to really quit, because I'm no longer following the mission. So again, I would always put it back to, you know, technology is great. It's the thing that makes the story real. Anybody can tell a story. It's the underlying tech that can make it real. But it's the who and the why, right, that's the most important aspect.
Cool, thanks. So let's stay on that theme. We've heard a lot of discussion today around smart also centers on data. And so Precision Hawk is working to collect data from different kinds of places that you weren't able to get data before. We had widespread use of drones. So talk about kind of the who and the why for that data. What value is getting created, and kind of what path is Precision Hawk driving?
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody, it seems, the past couple of years have been talking about big data and how important big data is. You know, one of the facts of the matter is, though, we've been collecting big data for decades. Just a lot differently than we are with things like drones. People who are going out and looking at power lines and utility lines, they're walking by foot with a checklist and checking off, this looks good, this looks good, this looks good. After a storm, and, you know, actually speaking to the past two hurricanes that we've had to endure the past month and a half, we've been collecting data around storm response for decades as well. Insurance companies like USAA, who is a big customer of Precision Hawk's, would send adjusters out immediately post a storm to assess the damage. And by them assessing that damage, they're able to help restore people's lives because of this data, in the sense that they understand the damage, they can cut a check to that homeowner, and then that homeowner can get their house repaired and back on with their lives. Now, where drones come into the picture is really now increasing the efficiency and increasing the accuracy out of that data collection. To give you an example, when collecting data from a drone for a storm response, since this is so relevant, we can very rapidly fly over an entire neighborhood of homes, literally in 15 minutes. I can see every house. I can calculate exactly how much damage had occurred to that house. Is it a total loss? Did they deal with flooding? Did they deal with hail damage to the roof? So that we very quickly can get that information back to companies like USAA, whose whole premise is getting a check into the customer's hand as quickly as possible. And why that's so important, and why they will pay to use drones over the existing way of doing this. Just to give you a reference, in the insurance world after a hurricane or disaster, getting a check into a customer's hands from, you know, time 0 to 48 hours can mean 6 to 8 months in a contractor actually getting out and starting to repair my house. So that's why companies like USAA are so interested, because we can fly a drone immediately. We don't have to wait for a satellite to pass over, which probably won't even be able to see because of all of the clouds. But we can get up, get in the airspace, collect the data, and start to repair these homes, to really repair these folks' lives who have lost everything. That's just one example of how we're applying this to, you know, really cities, and using data in a very smart way for cities. It's very similar in agriculture. You know, the big discussion the past couple of years as well is, how do we continue to feed our growing population worldwide? Well, you know, I don't remember the exact statistic off the top of my head, but in order to feed the projected population by 2050, we have to increase our crop production globally by something like order of magnitude of well over 100%, which is very difficult when in countries like the US, we're already at almost max capacity of being able to grow crops in our fields. And so that's where we're able to take drones, collect data that we've never even been able to collect in the past, where I can tell exactly how much nitrogen is in this plant so that I can go out and apply the exact amount of nitrogen to get that crop to the highest amount of efficiency of growth that I can. And that's how we're using drones to really try and collect data in not a new way, but a different way. And then applying advanced analytics to that in a big data way that we can create efficiencies across not just one specific farm, but across entire countries. And so that's where we're trying to take drones. A drone is just a fancy way to take pictures at the end of the day. We often say, if I could stand up a ladder that was 100 feet tall and move it across a field really, efficiently, that would be a lot safer than flying a drone because I don't have something flying through the air. Just so happens the drone is one of the more cost-effective ways and actually becoming one of the safest ways to collect a lot of this data.
And at least for the moment, nobody's fallen off a drone, so maybe it is safer. Who knows?
Not yet. Uber's working on that.
So I love how you're taking emerging technologies, you're solving problems in new ways that they haven't been solved before. That's really been at the essence of what Valencell has done since you've been founded. I'll give a quick another plug for NC State. A lot of people have heard about Cree as an LED-based company in the area that spun out of the university. Same with Valencell. So if you're from out of the area, you haven't heard of these folks, you absolutely need to check them out. Doing amazing things. I really liked during your introduction how you alluded that it's more than just the consumer application, that you're able to use this technology in some new areas that are helping maybe health at a deeper level. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, Ryan?
Yeah, so I'd be happy to. Yeah, it's funny. We still a lot of people still think of the wearables as smartwatches or fitness bands, and while that's certainly still an area of significant growth, as far as the wearable technology, the ingredient technology that goes into those devices has really started to get integrated into a broad spectrum of applications and use cases and devices. And the health and medical sector is certainly an area where we've seen a tremendous amount of interest and new projects around where we've noticed this probably, I'd say 3-4 years ago. We saw a noticeable shift in the nature of the inbound inquiries that were coming in for our technology, starting to come from health and medical companies. And that's a broad umbrella term, of course, so there's a lot underneath that. But where we're seeing the most interest and the most activity within that broad umbrella is with traditional medical device companies. So the companies like Siemens and GE and Medtronic and all the others in that space. Just taking a step back real quick, at a high level, you're seeing this macro level trend of consumer wearables and medical devices converging. And you look on the consumer side of things, any of the recent announcements from Apple, Fitbit, Garmin, you name it, the consumer wearables companies, they're all moving towards becoming personal health devices, if not outright medical devices in some cases. And the medical device companies have certainly taken notice of this and are now building products that are intended to be worn outside of a medical facility. The challenge on either side of that is, and both of those categories of companies are going after this notion of patient-generated health data. So there's much more data generated outside of medical facilities today that's relevant to our health and wellness than is generated inside a medical facility today, and that's certainly continuing to grow. The challenge for consumer wearables companies is, in general, they don't have medical grade accuracy in terms of what they're able to measure in the context that they're able to measure it. And of course, they don't want anything to do with the FDA or the regulatory process, so they're trying to stay on the non-regulated side of that line. On the other side, the medical device companies know all about the regulatory process and the need for high acuity data and what to do with that data once it's generated. The challenge on their side is that they, in general, don't know how to make something that people want to wear outside of a medical facility. And so You're seeing both of these categories of companies going after these opportunities. And fortunately, ValenCell is in a position to help both of those categories of companies. But there's also other things going on in the health and medical sector as a broad term with pharma companies in a couple of different use cases. So pharma companies and clinical research companies. So pharma companies so clinical research being one sector or one area of interest where adding in or layering in wearable data in the process of a clinical trial to provide contextual data on how an individual is responding to whatever drug or pharmaceutical is under test. And then looking further down that pipeline or that deployment of pharmacotherapies, the company's looking at how you augment the use of pharmacotherapy and pharmaceuticals with wearable devices, and particularly around being able to predict the onset of health complications or disease complications. I'll give you a couple of examples there. Think of asthma and COPD. There are numerous companies out there that think they, with a wearable device, have figured out how to predict the onset of an asthma attack or a COPD complication with enough advance notice to be able to give someone enough warning where they can take evasive action of some kind. So there's a lot of activity in that space as well. And then I mentioned AR and VR, and this is earlier stage, but it is, we're working with a company right now who has their technology, their VR technology deployed in 40 or 50 different hospitals and healthcare facilities now, using VR in combination with our biometric sensor systems to measure heart rate and other biometrics in the process of applying that to pain management applications. So someone puts on a VR headset, and it literally takes their mind off the pain. And they're seeing incredible results on the order of 50 to 60% pain reduction while someone has the headset on. And for reference, that's on par with pharmaceuticals and opioids. And obviously with the opioid crisis in this country, that's a meaningful difference. If someone could put on a VR headset instead of popping a pill, that's a significant improvement.
That's incredible.
Interesting things going on.
Absolutely.
In space.
Cool. Thanks, Ryan. So Keith, you're trying to disrupt construction and building management with digital tools. Certainly brand new, extremely disruptive. I heard during the lunch session, if I heard correctly, I think 50 million buildings owned by government across the country, municipal government, state government, and so on. Feels like that's a huge market opportunity. How should this hungry audience we've heard from today that wants to engage in Internet of Things technology, that wants to use this data, like how do they leverage a tool like yours, and what's kind of the low-hanging fruit, and then the kind of future?
Sure. So thank you for that question. When people talk about smart buildings, the first thing that people's mind jumps to is when they walk out of a room, the lights turn off. And when you've just heard everyone talking about their respective businesses and what they do, you realize how much things have moved on technology-wise. And I have to just go back to what Scott was talking about with the WHO. When you build a building and you're talking about a smart city, all of the things that people talk about, the lighting, the infrastructure, the roads, and energy, and all of these smart grids, everything that you put in place infrastructurally for a city is to move people into buildings and out of buildings. So buildings need to be at the core of your smart city strategy. So the WHO is the occupant, and a lot of property owners are now recognizing that it's the amenities that are as important as the energy savings and LEED certification and green policies. And now they're starting to see that green policies actually can have an economic benefit as well. And that's what's actually making people shift, and things are changing as a result of that. But then you start talking about, with what Tyler was mentioning about drone technology. And you have landscaping, you have the exterior of your buildings that you need to be thinking about as well, and the advent of these technologies that you need to incorporate, and the amount of data that you're bringing in as well. That needs to be applied. And then as well, when you start talking about the wearables, with the amenities that you want for your clients, they have smartphones, they have watches, they have things where you can start to do trend analysis and occupant analysis and traffic flow and start recognizing that we've got more than 100 people in this room, so we should probably drop the temperature. Or is this person supposed to be here at this moment in time? So there's safety as well. All the way through to business case opportunities of avoiding leaks and things like that. But all of that starts by getting a digital strategy. All of those need to start somewhere, and Site 1001 is a great opportunity for that starting point. Whether it's an existing building that's 50 years old, the first thing that you need to do is move away from paper operations. You'd be amazed to see how many very, very large companies still use spreadsheets to do capital planning, or use Post-it notes and spreadsheets and fax machines to just track what kind of work is being done in the building. So the first thing that we would want to do is come in and either in a new building, help accelerate the turnover process so that you walk into the building with a smart agenda straight out of the gates, optimize everything by working paper-free, or in a 50-year-old building, we've got AI technology and OCR capabilities to where we can process pallet loads of paper and digitize that in days. And so we actually sort through and dedupe, diversion, and effectively scan about 50% of the paper that people are actually keeping in their basement to then move them into a paperless operations environment and then move them on a smart journey to help them move up the food chain and really operate at a level that we need to get everyone up to with their building infrastructure.
Cool. That's very, very exciting. So I think what we're seeing here is while this is a startup panel, we've got companies they're on their way. They are already becoming established leaders in their sectors, and they're growing here. So I want to open a question to the panel, and while I do, those in the audience, I know everyone in this audience has an entrepreneurial spirit and ability within you, right? So I'm interested to hear some of your thoughts and questions. So we're going to open up in a moment to some audience questions. We have a couple people with microphones, so if you have something you'd like to ask, flag down these two friends here in the front, and we'll get a mic out to you. But first, I'm curious from the panel, 3 of the 4 companies represented here have had 8-figure or greater raises in the last 12 months in terms of fundraising. Keith's company is based in Kansas City but has opened an office here. Scott came to North Carolina to start his second company. He had some ties. But what is it about this area that makes it so attractive, or that you decided this is where you want to grow these ventures and kind of plant those seeds to become the next great pillars of this community? And we can start. You want, Scott? So
actually, honestly, I don't know that this statistic's right, but I'll say it like it is.
We believe you.
98% of probably startups, right, really start where the founder happens to live at that time or went to school or something, right, versus I don't hardly know anybody that moves to kind of do a startup. My last startup was in Melbourne, Florida. Great place, but that's where I happen to live. I think we were like the only startup ever in Melbourne. And, when the company was acquired, I retired, swore I would never work again, double swore I would really never do another startup. And I didn't very much like being a public company CEO. I don't know why, but it just doesn't seem to fit my personality. So we decided, my wife and I, decided to retire here, right? So I went to school, state, met my wife here in college. We got married the weekend after I graduated, moved to Florida 3 days later, and we're down there for 33 years. But I had been coming back and forth often to speak, sometimes to meet with IBM or eventually Lenovo. And I really liked the area. I wanted to stay involved in startups, not do a startup, right? So it's a longer story on why I ended up doing another startup. But the fact of the matter is the things that really brought me to retirement here was there was, even 5 years ago when we moved here, there was an ecosystem around this whole idea of a startup, right? There were, and this is important, right? There were startup attorneys, right? They understood, right, of how to put together those kind of term sheets and what they look like, right? There were startup accountants, and they understood, all the things associated with that, particularly around options, right? there were, VCs. There were no VCs in Melbourne, Florida, I can assure you, right? There were, a lot of angel investors. There were a number of incubators. There was a number of things. The city of Raleigh, right, through folks like Derek, and the city of Durham, later, I think a little bit Chapel Hill as well, really focused on what do we need to do, right, to foster kind of that startup ecosystem. So it is really, really hard to do a startup, like really hard, even if you have experience doing it. But the fact of the matter is, if you're surrounded by an ecosystem, right, by mentors, by city governments that understand what's necessary and tries to put that structure in place, it's a lot easier. Look, we're no San Francisco. I mean, anybody that ever says, like, we're the next Silicon Valley has actually never been to Silicon Valley, right? So
We're the first North Carolina.
But the fact of the matter is that, we are a microcosm of Silicon Valley. I mean, we have the same kind of resources and capabilities, right? And I definitely put us in the top 5 startup ecosystems in the country. And that's, in the end of the day, why Catherine and I moved here, and then it was a very logical place, and it was a lot easier to start a company here than it was in Melbourne, Florida, or, all the other places in the world that are not in the top 5.
Cool. Anyone else want to add to that?
I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I agree with Scott. I didn't move here specifically to do a startup, but I was lucky enough to have been here when I've been forming the startup. And I really think it's a combination of the local government working with the university system, working with the private sector, and really bringing that environment that is conducive to an entrepreneurial-minded group. And then obviously the access to talent between NC State grads, UNC grads. I've found it to be very receptive, and I've really enjoyed working around here. And then the local urban density that you have allows you to have focal points. So yes, it's definitely not Silicon Valley, and I'm happy for that, because I lived in San Francisco for a long time.
Right.
And that is a very, very hyper-competitive space, very difficult to find and retain talent. And a lot of the challenges that you have there, you don't have here, and a lot of the amenities that you would love to have there, you have here. So it's been really great for us.
Cool.
Yeah,
Great.
Let me just jump in. I mean, the other benefit of really moving here is, having been part of a company that was successful in the entrepreneurial world, is like I didn't have to buy a beer for like a year and a half, right? So, like every night there was an event. I ate most of my meal there, and certainly drank my fill of beer for free. So, like, it was really positive.
Other benefits.
Nice bonus.
It's a pretty good craft beer area too, right? So.
I'll just jump in and add, we're a good example of a company that was, 2 of our 3 founders were state PhDs, and we have a long, as Tom mentioned, a long successful relationship with the Assist Center and other key academic and public-private institutions within the area. So the talent pool is obviously critical, and but the other aspect of the pace of living, the style of living here is a huge attractor as well. So any talent we can't find here locally, which is pretty rare, it's pretty easy to attract people to come here because of all the benefits that we've talked about so far. So that's a critical factor as well.
Great. Any questions for the audience? And Derek, do you want to make any comment while the microphone's working its way out?
I talk to companies basically every day, and many of them are either here locally, they're recruiting talent in the market. There's been at least 3 dozen companies from Silicon Valley that have expanded here and opened up an office over the last 18 months. I mean, we have a huge influx of talent and opportunity. And one of the biggest differentiators is the types of people that are moving here, the actual community itself. They come in from the best markets across the country, and they want to contribute to the community, which is huge. It's regardless of where they move from, they adopt this Southern hospitality where they want to pay it forward. And that's huge for a newcomer that comes in that can get acclimated and connected into the resources that they need within just a few weeks. I mean, I meet at least 1 to 2 people a week that have just moved here from these markets, and that's the big thing. They can move here, and there's no barriers to entry, which is attractive.
Derek introduced myself and my co-founder, and probably wouldn't have started the company if it hadn't been for this man right here.
Let's hear it for Derek. All right, questions?
Thank you all for sharing your insights. My question has to do with the innovation ecosystem. Last week at the Startup Summit, David Gardner, who's the CEO and chairman of Co-Founder Capital, one of our lead angel investors, identified that the challenge we have is a floodline of talent, but a lack of capital. And he threw out some ideas of corporate venture and different things. So what are your thoughts on that? Why is it that we have a challenge? We've had two venture funds closing their funds, InterSouth and Wakefield is gone, and Aurora is closing their fund, which is more life sciences. So definitely there's less venture capital today in the triangle than there was 10 years ago. So I just want to get your input in terms of how can we get creative to bring in more capital, and why is this problem occurring in our region?
I would disagree with the point that it's less attractive on a venture side. So, like in the end of the day, right, a venture firm is completely, I wouldn't want to, I was on the other side of the table for a little bit. I really didn't like it at all. You're measured on IRR. And if you're hitting your IRR, no matter where you invest, you get more money, and you get a lot more money. And if you don't hit your IRR, you don't get more money, right? So, so I do think, I mean, it is challenging, honestly, in the area. And I think it's the entire Southeast, right, is to, attract money. I will say, because of some of the success, right, the West Coast venture, where most of ours is from, right, is they're honestly swinging for the fences. They're looking at a 10x return, right? I'd say in the Southeast, it's a little bit more concerned with, they want that opportunity as well, but they also want to try to kind of manage the downside a little bit, right? But I think the really, really big thing is, look, people follow. I don't care what you're in, people follow. And success breeds success. I always tell people, it sounds strange, but losers lose and winners win, right? Like, if you're winning, people feel it, they know it, and they follow with it. What we really need is, right, some big exits, right? And an exit can be an IPO, so that there's companies here that turn into Apple and Google and Facebook and Twitter, and God knows how many you can name out in Silicon Valley, right? We get excited when a company sells for $200 million. We're like, who cares? So, that doesn't breed, multiple millionaires, a lot of success, and then people going like, I want to be in that company. So I'm excited about, companies like the companies that are here, right? Or Pendo. These are companies that have the opportunity for, IPOs, $1 billion, $2 billion exits, right? I joke with people, it's kind of a joke, like, used to be able to sell a company for $400 million, and now it's like embarrassing, right? So, I go to Silicon Valley, it's like, oh, your company got bought by Apple. How much? $400 million. Oh, what was wrong? And you're like, so I think, if we look at some of the companies that are sitting here, and then Pendo, and there's probably 2 or 3 other companies in the area, I hope they hold on. I hope they don't try to sell for 400, 500, 600 million. I hope they go for that 2 billion, 5 billion. I hope they do exit, right, as an IPO. And let me tell you, you can say anything you want, right? People will follow that success, and money will pour into the area. By the way, you now have experienced managers, right, that can leave that company, right, and go start, the next company. So I do think that we just have to breed, we continue to focus and breed these successful companies. And when those start happening, right, then, we will be, kind of maybe a more minor, but more like Silicon Valley, at least to some extent.
Let me add to that. Even though some of the local funds have shut down, we still have quite a good influx of out-of-state capital that's flowing into the market. that's one of the things I think it might have been Scott that told me early on was that once a VC actually gets into a company, then they're going to be much more aggressive in trying to figure out who else is here, who should they be watching. So it's really just a matter of time from that perspective. When you look at the investors that are all within these companies, I mean, most of them are out of state. There's a lot of West Coast capital that's very interested in this market. The valuation, especially smaller funds like Anthos Capital and a number of others, they just want good returns. So out in the Bay Area, they would be competing against some of the bigger firms. Here, they don't have as much competition, and as long as they can get their IRR, as Scott had mentioned, they can get in a company that's solid. That as long as they hit their multiple, they're good, and that's attractive for them as well. But I definitely agree on we need bigger exits to help fuel that as well.
And I can reflect your comments on out-of-state money coming into North Carolina. Precision Hawk is an example. The majority of our investors are West Coast investors. Intel Capital, Verizon, although they're out of New York, but their ventures is out of San Francisco. And the capital's not the hard piece to find. And actually what we've experienced with many of these investors is that, from their perspective, especially when the majority of our competition, since we're technically a software company, the majority of our competition is in Silicon Valley, dollar for dollar, we're able to compete for the same dollar amount a lot more being based in North Carolina. Because one, we can attract really good talent, but it's much cheaper to operate. And so they look at that as a factor as well, and that's been something that's helped us raise as much money as we have, where us, like many other companies on the East Coast, are not having an issue finding money, as long as the value proposition's there. And in fact, many companies are being oversubscribed by investors from the experience and from what we've seen personally.
If you're solving a problem and doing a good job, the money will come. I think to some degree it's a whole red herring discussion. North Carolina has brought more venture in this year than any other year, and we've still got 2 months to go. So I think we're actually very well positioned. But we're out of time. If these folks have inspired you like they have us, I would encourage you. We run a startup accelerator program out of Riot, and applications are open right now. Come see myself or Rachel, who's in the front row. We'd love to talk to you about helping your company to move forward. Let's give one last, 2 to 3 words each. What has you most excited about this entrepreneurial ecosystem and what's happening in the region? And we'll just work down the row.
Just growth. I've been working with Riot for a while, and I feel like the community's growing, and we're really happy to be a part of that.
Yeah, I'll second that, and I think there are, for the first time in quite a while that I've seen, to Scott's point about the potential for large exits, which is critical. There's more potential right now for large exits in this area than I've seen since I've been here.
And I just want to reflect on the human capital in the area as well. We've been hiring more people than we've hired. We hired over 100 people this year at Precision Hawk, and the majority of that is locally sourced. And so, it's just an incredible area to be in, and really incredible people, driving this forward.
So I already talked about the kind of the winning philosophy, and I think that we have that coming. But let me tell you, just as an aside, the thing I really like about North Carolina and moving back here, right, is people are really nice. Like, when you put your blinker on a highway, like, people slow down and let you in. Like, I'm from New Jersey. That was a sign of weakness, right? So, look, it's a great place to live. I think we're, breeding some great winners, and I think that, hopefully their investors and the management team, really stay focused on not the single or the double or even the triple, but that home run, right? And I think the leaders that I know that are here will do that. And when that happens, and as that happens, right, the area will continue to grow internally.
Yeah, and just to echo everything that everyone has already said, we really are on the cusp. I mean, just seeing how Raleigh and really the entire region has now become so much more coordinated and really working together to ensure success is huge. 8 years ago, it was not like that. We've come a long way, and we just got started, so we're excited.
Fantastic. Let's thank the panel.